Excellencies, dear students, dear members of the Diplomatic Club, dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege for us, for the Diplomatic Club of Geneva, to co-organize this event with the Graduate Institute, with a topic that is very hot in somehow, promoting human rights with UN institution we should have had in a very difficult environment. In an environment where short-term and national interests are taking over and where UN institutions are under attack. The UN Human Rights Council is a vital mechanism for preventing and monitoring human rights violations and abuses and for enhancing access to justice and remedies for victims. States and non-state actors have called for strengthening the fulfillment of its mandate and purpose and to make it more efficient. But some states and non-state actors are asking for the contrary, are also asking for dismantling this kind of institution, and especially this institution. So tonight we would like to discuss how to achieve reforms, how to explain the future, the action of the UN Council and of the Commission, how this institution can ensure that each country upholds and promotes human rights. We would also like to hear how far are these institutions, human rights institutions, still legitimate by the system? And how these different institutions interact together. So to debate these topics, we have two very special guests. Tonight, first keynote speaker will be Michelle Bachelet, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Actually, everybody knows Michelle Bachelet. Prior to her appointment at the office, Michelle Bachelet has a distinguished political career in Chile, where she was president from 2006 to 2010, and again from 2014 to 2018, and served also as Minister of Health and Defense. And during her two presidential terms, she was appointed the first executive director of the newly created UN Women. The second speaker with us tonight is actually a member of the committee of the Diplomatic Club, His Excellency Coly Seck, President of the Human Rights Council, 13th cycle. Since 2016, Coly Seck has been permanent representative of Senegal to the United Nations office in Geneva, and prior to his assignment here in Geneva, he had a significant responsibility within the Senegalese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as the permanent mission of Senegal in New York. So I think it's a great privilege to have you both here tonight to, first of all, to hear your remarks, and secondly, to listen to your discussion, and thirdly, to your answer to the question our animator will ask and the audience will ask. Then the keynote speeches will be followed by a discussion moderated by Vincent Chetaille. He's Professor of International Law at the Graduate Institute, Director of the Global Migration Center, and board member of the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights. And after the discussion, you will all have the opportunity to ask the question you want. So thank you for being here tonight, and dear High Commissioner, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Loretan, and thank you, Excellencies. I'm really pleased to be here engaging in an informal dialogue with this audience about the future evolution of the world's foremost intergovernmental body for monitoring and preventing violations and abuses of human rights. For me, there are two important approaches, prevention and dialogue, which are always foremost in my mind, and I view them as strongly linked. Prevention, we need to prevent human rights violations from occurring in the first place. As I was mentioning today in a meeting we were with the Human Rights Council President on an informal session with the Council, yes, we can do the history of the violation of human rights, but for me that's not enough. We need to try to prevent them from happening, first of all. We need to monitor them, of course, but we also need to change the situation on the ground. But I think that we need to prevent from happening, whether they are violation of civil and political rights, or of course economic, social, and cultural rights, and of course gender rights as well. And we need to prevent existing patterns of violations from escalating into deeper crises. It's true, every situation has its own specific challenges. But concrete measures, such as support for reforms of the justice system and the security sector, for example, efforts to dismantle discrimination, including gender discrimination, work to broaden the civic space and strengthen public freedoms. And to be honest, today, what we have to do is to fight against the shrinking of civic space that we see everywhere. And of course, work to reduce inequalities. I am completely convinced that in the heart of many of the problems that we see today, and particularly in conflict setting, are inequalities, all kinds of inequalities. We need to create more opportunities to uphold economic, social, and cultural rights, have lasting impact in every situation, all of these issues. So prevention is an essential part of the Council's mandate under General Assembly Resolution 60/251. Furthermore, in Resolution 13/18, the Council appointed a shared rapporteur and two rapporteurs to facilitate intersessional seminars to consider how the Council can effectively contribute to prevention in the future. And I'm following this matter with great interest and look forward to their report while the Council they will consider in March. And when I have been able to talk to people from the Security Council, and you know we're going to talk a little bit about the gap between New York and Geneva, I've been sort of making lobby and the propaganda that the human rights system can be a very important preventive tool, because we do gather through all the different mechanisms a lot of very important information that give us many times early warning signs that if the international community considers seriously, we could even try to avoid things from happening. And we can mention prevention tools like as resolutions and discussions. I'm convinced that the Council's spotlight on a wide range of situations is an important element for future accountability, and that thanks to the spotlight, very serious human rights situation has been avoided. Even the prospect of a resolution sometimes, or a special session, can have an preventive impact, because authorities that will be included in that discussion sometimes take action so to avoid the escalation of the issues. Special procedures. This is something that's been discussed. We have all these special rapporteurs that many of them are thematic and some of them on country situation. When I came, I'm just a year in my post, and when I was in Chile thinking what should be things that we could do about it, and I read that there was like 86 people from special procedures, from 50-something mandates, 56 or something. I thought, well, are they all needed, really? I mean, from Chile, not being here, but many are for so many years. And in my experience that I had, that sometimes the special rapporteur for, what was it, how you call that? Mercenaries went to see Chile. And I said to him, but we don't have mercenaries in Chile. Yes, but during the Iraq war, some private contractor hired former Marines to go there. I said, yes, but this is not a state policy. So I asked myself, but then when I came to the retreats of the Human Rights Council, somebody told me, don't go that way. Every country has its baby. That is their particular area issue. So don't go that way. You won't have good experience. But now that I have seen the work of special rapporteurs, there are some that are better than others, but the truth is that they play a very important job, because with an independent view, they can identify problems or situations, they can give recommendations that are really important, and they can perform essential preventive functions while they scrutinize human rights situations, but also, as I said, provide detailed recommendations for action. But also we believe that the UPR the UPR, the Universal Periodic Review, it's a peer review by member states, also provides a very important measure of public accountability regarding the implementation of states' commitment to reform. First of all, they analyze the country, they give a diagnosis, they give recommendations that if they are followed by, and the states approve, and a big number of those, really, if the UPR has become, from my point of view, a very important instrument on the human rights promotion. In terms of its operation, the Council has also introduced special sessions, intersessional discussion, a streamlined agenda, and increased the use of digital tools. So I think all the measures that the Council itself have been developing to create greater efficiency and effectiveness are really welcome. In the context also of successive rounds of the UPR, the Council continued to work with every UN member state without exception. In today's challenging climate, this is not a small achievement. The other important thing is that particular funds have been increased to engage and increase the engagement of least developed countries and small island development states. In our case, we have a fund that supports their capacity to develop the UPR and to implement recommendation afterwards. But as we are dealing with all challenges in human rights, one of the issues that we also need to deal with new challenges. I mean, as an office and of course the Council as well. So we need to continue working very strongly, monitoring and giving recommendations on political and civil rights, economic, social, cultural rights, gender rights, but we are also dealing with issues that are so challenging worldwide, like climate change. So we are trying to push hard to make the case how important it is to have climate action, because climate change will produce serious violation of human rights. It is already producing serious violation of human rights in many parts of the world, and it will be even worse if we are not able to get the temperature of the planet less than 1.5. So we are making the case in every place, and also I try to bring my own experience here to this post. So I speak with the hat of High Commissioner, but I also can speak with the hat of former President to say it can be done. Chile was not a rich country. We did this and this and this. So what mainly you need in all of this is political will and leadership. I'm also, but we have other challenges that are very important. For example, business and human rights is the other thing that we are working very strongly. But the other one that I think is very important, and both climate and this one is very important for youth, is what about technology and human rights, artificial intelligence and human rights? Because everybody speaks about the 4.0 industrial revolution, and they speak as well as the artificial intelligence of the way to solve so many problems of humanity, and I believe that could be true, but on the other hand, we have been seeing the misuse of all those technologies of social media to, for example, social media on hate speech, and in Myanmar, the hate speech through social media triggered violence against the Rohingyas. And in other places of the world as well. So how we, and that's where we're working with companies, how we ensure to work with them to improve the best part of technology or artificial intelligence, but to avoid the misuse or the bad part of it. Because we have had already evidence that technology has the same bias of the developers. Going to Google, for example, 80% of developers are men. And when you see it from ethnical origins, if I may say, only 4% are, I said men, white men, should I say. Only 4% of the of the people who work there, they are Latinos, but from them, only 2% are developers. After descent, only 2% of the whole people who work, but only 1% are developer. So they have the same bias. So the robots or the application, the algorithms, and so on, they have discovered they have their gender bias and their Afro-descent bias. So, and we have problems because, for example, in some companies, they are developing these robot soldiers that they will identify the target through facial recognition. So it's really threatening if we don't take measures, and we don't have much time because the technology and the industry is accelerating its efforts, it's moving fast, and the international community is not moving as fast. The Secretary General developed a panel on digital issues, and it's a lot of recommendations, but I believe the main interesting thing to bring here in this discussion is that they tell the UN to be the convening power to sit together, public sector, private sector, academia, scientists and research, developers and civil society, to see what can we do, because this cannot be solved like today, that every company solve it through its own ethics office, because ethics is not the same from one company to another, neither from one part of the world to another. So we need some international agreements on this thing, and it's very important. Well, I'm a little obsessed with this issue, but I'll come to another issue now. But also very encouraged on the Council, increasing engagement on sustainable development goals. One of the things, when I arrived to the office, I said, look, we cannot tell governments that human rights are indivisible and we are only focusing on political and civil rights. We need to do more. We have done it in the past, but we need to do more on economic, social, and cultural rights, gender rights, and all these new challenges. But we also need to see how we can include the human rights approach, if I may say, into the global goals that the UN has, the Agenda 2030 with Sustainable Development Goals. So I created 3 task forces, one on prevention, one on economic, social, and cultural rights, and one on Sustainable Development Goals, and to see which is the added value that our office can give to the UN in all the tasks that we have in common. And I think it's very important because Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030 are human rights grounded. And I think I see it as a unique opportunity to address deep-seated root causes of violations and also to advance prevention across the whole human rights agenda, including the right to development. And I want to emphasize 2 points here in the context of future efforts for prevention. I believe we need to strengthen follow-up to human rights recommendations, because they require not just acceptance by member states. We need action. We need them to be implemented. And I view dialogue as a key tool for progress, because states are the primary actors in upholding human rights. So it is states who have to implement those recommendations. So that's why I'm giving so much importance on engaging member states, because they are the ones who need to do what they have to do. So, I've been trying to develop a relation of respect and truth. That doesn't mean that you have to be silent. You can do both things. And I think also that the fulfillment of our mandate, the Agenda 2030, the climate action to combat climate change, will only be possible if we have, on one hand, political will and leadership, but on the other hand, genuine and free dialogue with civil society. I mean, the voice of the people on the ground. But not only the voice, because at the end, many of these things require a change of behavior, a culture change. So we need people to also be on board. The other issue that I want to mention that we are really concerned about many times is reprisals against civil society who work with us, collaborate with us, or with different UN bodies and the Council. And we believe this as unacceptable. And I'm encouraged by the emphasis placed by the Council on the need to struggle against reprisals, and in particular by the President's action on this regard. And I think we both agree that more should be done by all concerned, and that all of those who participate in the Council session or in the work of its mechanism should be able to do it without any fear or threat. The other important thing for us is how we mainstream the human rights approach in the whole UN system. That's one of our mandates. And we work with regional organizations, with the AU, or we work with other regional mechanisms like the Council of Europe, the Inter-American Office of Human Rights, with the AU as well, etc. And of course, we need to continue strengthening partnership across the UN system. And as I mentioned before, there is still a gap between New York and Geneva, which we need to overcome. And some things have been already done. President of the Council needs to be able to engage regularly with actors in New York, and this process is well underway. Regular meetings with the chairs of the 3rd and 5th Committee, as well as the President of the General Assembly, and the President has invited the PGA, who was here some months ago. So we need to work with the newly reformed UN Development Framework to make sure that human rights recommendations are integrated into the UN Sustainable Development, it has a very long name, UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework. So what it was called before UNDAF, now I cannot pronounce the acronyms, but it's that. And it's supposed to be mainly focused on Agenda 2030. So all this program that has to be approved by government, that the UN will propose government because we need national ownership on what's there, it will be mainly on Agenda 2030. And human rights violations have very clear impact on peace and security issue. And I mentioned to you that every time that I've been speaking with the members of the Security Council and participated either in ARIA formula or I participated in one formal Security Council meeting on Haiti, I was looking forward to show how important, how the contribution of us as a system, not only as an office, could be so important. I was just going to give one example. There were 5 different reports of special rapporteurs on Myanmar that said that a genocide would come if things don't change. And nobody listened, nobody took action. And in the council was the first time it was discussed. Before, didn't discuss in any other part of the UN, I mean, of the intergovernmental bodies. So I really believe that we can, through all the information from all these mechanisms, the early warning signs are there, giving us alert, and we can provide with the Security Council information that can lead them to have action before things happen, or at least as soon as possible. The other thing I want to mention is that the climate action must be a priority, but I think I've spoken a lot about that, and a long part of my statement on Monday when we open the 42nd session of the Human Rights Council will be on this issue. We have a problem on resources. I'm not going to bother you about that. If you want to ask me afterwards, you can ask me. But to conclude, if we are to meet the challenges of the future, we need a more robust council supported by a strengthened secretariat, because unfortunately we do not have enough staff to support them. We do our best, but our people are overloaded and they do the best they can. We have to act with flexibility and realism in a transparent environment, with a view to tackling all human rights issues, whether thematic or country-based, whether on economic, social, and cultural rights, civil and political rights, or the right to development, wherever they are occurring, whatever the size and influence of the concerned country, with profound impact at the domestic level. We need a strong and efficient system of special procedures, a UPR system which is implemented fully at the country level, with all UN and regional actors actively involved in the implementation of all human rights for all. I have been here for a year. I have learned what works very well. One of the things that I was mentioning today, that one of the things that I do, because when you come with fresh eyes, you want to know what works, what doesn't work, why it works, and why it doesn't work, and try to make differences and try to think what can be the best, the more important strategies. In the complex world where we are right now, multilateralism under threat, it's really very important that we can ensure the best strategies and the best narrative that we can convince people to do the right thing. And I'm trying to bring my experience and this sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raymond. Dear Raymond. Thank you very much for inviting me today. Madam High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, Mr. Professor Vincent Chattel, Professor of International Law and Director of the Global Migration. Dear colleagues, Mr. Michael Muller, former Director General of UNOC, thank you very much. We are here to discuss today a critical issue that deserves our attention and reflection: the importance of the UN institutions, and especially the Human Rights Council, in ensuring the protection of human rights. The Human Rights Council have been established by the GA in 2006, following then Secretary General Kofi Annan's report called Enlarged Freedom. It is mandated to promote universal respect for the protection of all human rights and fundamental freedom of all. The Human Rights Council is the only intergovernmental body on human rights where the voices of all stakeholders can be heard. It is an integral part of the UN. In addition to addressing violation of human rights, it promotes effective coordination and mainstreaming of human rights within the UN system and makes recommendations to the General Assembly for the further development of international law in the field of human rights. We know we have three pillars in the UN system: human rights, peace and security and development. And the Human Rights Council plays an important role in linking the three pillars of the UN. In a world where multilateralism and human rights are being challenged on a daily basis, the Human Rights Council has never been so necessary. The Human Rights Council mechanism, like the Universal Periodic Review and special procedures, are very important. The UPR, where the human rights record of all 193 members states are reviewed, provides us with a map of the status of human rights around the world. Special procedures are independent experts that act as the ears and eyes of the Council. Some investigative mechanism situation in a specific country, while others look at a specific human rights issue around the world. Their reports to the Council include also recommendations. The prevention role of the Council is very important because the General Assembly also mandated the Council to contribute throughout dialogue and cooperation towards the prevention of human rights violations and respond promptly to human rights emergencies. The Human Rights Council contribute to the prevention of further violation and escalation of situation by providing information and making invaluable contributions to the response of the United Nations system as a whole. It effectively is an early warning system for impending and worsening crises. The Council's special procedures, as well as its monitoring and investigative bodies, provide up-to-date, reliable information on the condition of human rights on the ground. UPR, also, the Universal Periodic Review, draws attention to human rights abuses and violations and contribute to their non-recurrence. While it is up to the state to ensure implementation, the multilateral system, and especially the Human Rights Council, supports states in their implementation efforts. Regarding the sanctioning of the work of the Council, I have to say that abuses and violations of human rights continue to take place on a daily basis, and no country is immune. We need to do much more to ensure that our words are translated into concrete action to the benefit of rights holders everywhere, regardless of its positioning to support states in implementation efforts. If there is no trust in the Council, then all of our work will remain as words on paper. In order to build the trust, we need sufficient time and space within the Council to properly engage in frank and open dialogue. That is why it is essential that we continue to work to improve the efficiency of the Human Rights Council. It is not a reform process, but just an efficiency process. The Council must have more time to examine new issues and engage in constructive dialogue on how to ensure every day more better protection of human rights on the basis of the sanctioning of our common humanity. There is serious and constructive engagement by all stakeholders in the ongoing process to strengthen the efficiency and effectiveness of the Human Rights Council, widely regarded as a sound way to ensure that the Council is improving its working method without losing sight of the importance of its substantive work. Other questions regarding changes to the status of the Council and the content of the agenda, perhaps we'll discuss it later, are questions to be answered by the General Assembly in New York. But the Human Rights Council can provide feedback and an input to the review of its own mechanism that is supposed to be held between 2021 and 2026. In conclusion, I would like to say that we are all members of the human community and we must work with respect for each other and mutual listening in order to reach consensus on the urgent human rights issues that beset us today while having the sense of anticipation that allows us to approach with serenity the issues that are on the horizon. With the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the member states have accepted that the dignity of the person is their common horizon. For this, we must refer to the spirit of humanity and active solidarity. The Human Rights Council, with its guiding principle of universality, impartiality, objectivity, non-selectivity, and constructive international dialogue and cooperation, provides the international community with the perfect platform to come together. If human rights issues are not discussed in the Human Rights Council, they have little chance to be dealt with meaningfully elsewhere. That's why we need to support the Human Rights Council. We must be among those who refused to accept the unacceptable, those who refuse to yield to cynicism and skepticism. Between angelism and cynicism, we must choose angelism because it allows at least to maintain and to bring hope. Solutions to any challenge the Council may face may be solved by dialogue, cooperation, mutual listening, and mutual understanding. We need to create a more cooperative atmosphere within the Human Rights Council. We need to strengthen the Council's relationship with New York, especially the Third Committee. We need to strengthen also cooperation with regional organizations like the African Union. We need to increase the visibility of the Human Rights Council and increase participation of civil society and human rights defenders in the work of the Human Rights Council. We need to respond promptly to all allegations of intimidation and reprisals against individuals who seek to cooperate or who have cooperated with the Human Rights Council. I thank you very much. I'm ready to respond to any question you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very interesting, clear, and didactic presentation. We will continue now with some discussions about the general situation of human rights within the UN and at the international level. Clearly, our current world gives us reasons both to hope and to despair. From a positive angle, human rights represent a truly common concern of the international community as a whole, including states, but not only, all stakeholders. Human rights are the business of everybody. And nowadays, states are bound by a very sophisticated and detailed body of rules and duties. And clearly, one of the greatest achievements of the UN is the creation of a comprehensive body of human rights law, a universal and internationally protected code that is binding for states. And this is something important to be restated today. Human rights is no longer a question of choice. Human rights is binding for all states, and this is not only a founding principle of the UN Charter, but states have ratified a broad number of treaties about due respect for human rights. The United Nations also established several institutions, mechanisms aimed at promoting and protecting human rights. And clearly, here again, human rights are a cross-cutting issue in all UN policies and programs, in many related areas of peace, security, development, humanitarian assistance, economic and social affairs. So virtually every UN body and specialized agency is involved to some degree in the protection of human rights. And while all UN institutions are involved in human rights, clearly you represent and lead the two most important UN institutions specifically dedicated to human rights within the UN. And that is why your presence here is important, and your view about the future of human rights within the UN is important. After this positive aspect, of course, from a more negative angle, the gap between principles and practice, between theory and reality, has ever been so huge. Obviously, no country is able to give lessons in human rights. But the most worrying aspect today is the rise of the backlash against human rights. More than ever before, sovereignty and national borders are being invoked to violate human rights. With the rise of nationalism and populisms, there has been a dramatic change of policy on human rights. And today, oppression is fashionable. Racism has become mainstream. And this is really the most worrying aspect about the current situation. In a world where human rights are being challenged on a daily basis, my main question for you to start the debate is very basic. What is the role of multilateralism in promoting human rights? According to both of you, what shall be done within your respective institutions in order to develop further multilateralism? What are the new strategies to be developed? What are the innovative tools to improve the current situation? And what counter strategies to backlash are needed? Because this is probably the most urgent need today.
Well, if we could answer that question, then we will win the Nobel Peace Prize or something like that. Huh? But to tell the truth, this is something, because first of all, I think the strengthening of multilateralism is not based mainly in what our structures could do. I think multilateralism needs leadership, clear leadership. And I feel lack of strong leadership in the world, or a leadership who can send bad signals, if I may say. And what we need is leaders that are role models, that they are principles and values, and they can speak against all this hate speech, xenophobic speech, anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-migrant, etc., etc. But the problem that we're dealing is we have lots of different problems. First of all, that it looks like the world, how we thought it was, has changed. Values and principles that we thought were universally adapted, no? Adapted in the sense of in real life, because of course they are in the instruments that have been agreed by a majority of people. I do believe that human rights are universal, but I mean on the daily basis, or what countries do with them, are not as we thought. And it looks like what we thought should be sort of the world that emerged after the wars, that it could last with some, of course, reforms and improvement forever, is gone. I think there's not a political consensus in the international community on everything right now. Many years ago, it was politically incorrect to say many of the things you even listen leaders of the world to say. Maybe they always thought the same, but you couldn't tell it. Because one of the things I've asked myself when I see Europe and see the rising of national populism or xenophobic or hate speech, I ask myself, is it that has emerged, or it was always there, but nobody dared to say it because it would be punished socially and politically? And my impression is that because you see big leaders giving themselves the license to say these kind of things, make other people to have the license to openly discuss. So, and I say this because I truly believe that multilateralism is essential. For many different reasons, I would say 2 or 3 that are obvious and that all of you share. First of all, more than ever, we have global challenges. or no country, even the most powerful, will be able to solve the global challenges with individual or local solutions. I mean, you can have always local solutions, but I mean not only national solutions. Because many of the challenges cross the borders. And if we think of climate change, if we think of migration, if we think sometimes in diseases like Ebola, no? To mention just 3 examples, I mean, there's no one country, for powerful that it is, to solve the problem. Even if you see now in some parts of Africa, the rising groups that use extremist ways of dealing with lots of issues, they are not only restrained to one country. And you see, for example, that countries, the G5 Sahel countries, they all have common challenges and dealing with common problems. And many of the group moves from one place to another. And if you go to Cameroon in the north, from Nigeria, Boko Haram will pass and produce, and then they will move to other place, and people, armed group from Central African Republic would come to Cameroon as well. So everything is so interconnected, not only on communications, because that's, of course, another reality. So I believe that multilateralism has been under attack by many reasons, but mainly because of the rise of this sort of nationalism, understanding that patriotism is against multilateralism, and that's not true. Because you can be a very patriotic person, but understand that the best for your nation is that the whole world goes in the right direction and we all solve problems together. So, but we need leaders, a strong leader with strong voices. Having said that, because you see the same pushback on human rights, pushback on gender rights. We have this year the Cairo Plus 25 meeting in Nairobi, and next year Beijing Plus 25. And I have to tell you, the discussions and negotiations have been very difficult. Very difficult, because even in the Security Council the other day, a couple of months ago, on sexual violence victims, it was not possible in the resolution is very good, but it could not include the phrase that we should ensure victims of sexual violence in conflict settings of sexual and reproductive services. We're not even talking for the whole female humanity. We're talking about victims of rape, victims of sexual violence. And it was not possible because one important country vetoed it. So I would say we are in that situation. What to do? Give up? No, we shouldn't give up. And on the other hand, just to show a little bit more sunny side, I think the majority of the countries, on one hand, the smaller ones, on one hand, the underdeveloped ones, but also big countries and developed countries, understand this issue very well. And that's why, even though it was not the whole UN, and when I'm talking UN, I mean the intergovernmental bodies, approved the Global Compact on Migration, but 150-something. So that's important. That means the majority understands that migration is a reality, and the only way to deal with it is in an orderly and safe way to do it. The same with Global Compact of Refugees. And the same in Katowice last year on the climate action plan after the Paris Agreement. And I hope in Santiago, the next COP also have important steps. And that's what the Secretary General is trying to do in the high-level panel in September, when there will be the Climate Action Summit, the Universal Health Coverage Summit, and the SDGs and Agenda 2030 Summit, is to bring states to commit to do the things we need to do to stop leaving people behind and to really be able to improve the governments. What we can do, I mean, I'm not going to be myself, Ambassador Seck will say what he wants to say. I think we need to continue making advocacy and showing the linkages between human rights and climate change, human rights and conflicts, human rights, and whatever, and also make advocacy a strong voice on the solutions, and that they need to be global, collective, and they cannot be individuals. And we need to do it looking also, and that's one of the things I'm trying to do in the office, how we improve the narrative. Because sometimes when you only talk about principles and values, I've been in politics, but I'm not a typical politician, I have to say. But when you have a government for 4 years, it's difficult for politicians to think in the medium and long term. They tend to think on the shorter term, particularly when they have re-elections. But we need to think then how to show them that to work with a human rights approach, to support multilateralism, is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. So that's why I'm always trying to think which are the arguments that can show member states or parliaments, and of course civil society, but civil society is always much more on this side, why it's so important to work on that. And we have been thinking on strategies, how we can be smarter because the world is much more complex, how, that's what I mentioned, how we add value to things that are going there, and how we can visit countries, talk to all stakeholders there, and try to promote. And the other thing we need is more youth involved. More youth involved because we need not only for current leaders, we need future leaders, because I think we don't have enough current leaders that are really doing that strong fight, and we need much more on that.
Thank you. I will come back later on the role of the civil society, because it is clearly a major issue. Dear Ambassador, regarding my initial question, how improve multilateralism in the current politically toxic debate, we can say, about human rights. How do you have any specific tools for developing further or new strategies to be developed?
Thank you very much. I don't have the liberty of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. I'm an acting ambassador and president of an intergovernmental body, but I will respond to your question.
High Commissioner, so we can say what you can say.
As you have said, multilateralism is in crisis, it is clear, but as far as human rights is concerned, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is universal because it is not making any reference about any religion, any ideology, any culture. So every state can implement the Universal Declaration without having to leave aside his values and so on. So what is the problem in the Human Rights Council is that you have sovereignty of states, and you have some members thinking that we should only think this way, or human rights, the declaration can be implemented in all the countries, as I said, without leaving aside your values, your religion, your culture. And we need to listen how to discuss, how to cooperate, how to listen to each other, how to respect opinion and position of any country. What is important is beyond our differences to try to get a common denominator on how we should protect human rights in all corners of the globe. And having this common denominator, reaching this consensus is the difficult part of the job, because in my country, we abolished the death penalty, but it is still, in many countries that consider themselves as champion of human rights. We do not accept same-sex marriage, but it is applied somewhere else. But how we can discuss on these very critical issues and try to get a minimum of how we should protect our fellow human being. When we were adopting the resolution on SOGI last September, we had 3 hours, we spent 3 hours voting. These are very difficult issues, concrete issues and difficult. And you got instruction from your capital. You have to implement these instructions because the instructions are based on what you believe in your religion, in your culture, in your value. That's why we need to learn how to respect each other, how to discuss without, having to insult each other, and how to reach very little common denominator, even though it's little, but we should discuss and try to protect a little bit our fellow human being. When we are talking about violence against on sexual orientation, we are not talking about legalizing, LGBT everywhere, but protecting them against violence. This is a basic human rights we have to implement in every country. So this is a real debate, and we are trying to do our best in the council, but as you know, it's not easy. I remember during my last trip in New York, I had a discussion with members of an informal discussion, as we said, with members of the Security Council about how the Security Council can support the work of the Human Rights Council, because we need someone to echo what we are doing in New York. And after coming back to Geneva, many countries were protesting because they said that there should be no link between the Human Rights Council and the Security Council. In the United Nations, where we are talking about three pillars, peace and security, development and human rights, how could you say that there should be no link, no discussion between Security Council and Human Rights Council? These are the debates we are facing, and I think that by mutual understanding, listening to each other, we will be able, I think, to promote a little bit more cooperation, more multilateralism, and get, hopefully, better protection of human rights.
Thank you. And clearly, increasing dialogue between states is crucial. But states are the main actors in implementing human rights, but also the main actors in violating them. So increasing dialogue is crucial, but not necessarily sufficient in itself. And of course, it works in tandem with monitoring processes, like the one that are established within the UN. Monitoring processes, but also complaint mechanisms are also crucial. So clearly there is a need for a comprehensive approach. Education is also important, of course, especially because many politicians are not well educated in human rights, manifestly, but also for the youth generation, as you mentioned. So given the actors are quite ambivalent regarding human rights in these times, how improve the role of the civil society within your respective institutions? Because clearly, you mentioned the civil space, and there is an important role to be played as a way also to mitigate the polarization between states about human rights. What, of course, civil society are involved in your institutions, but how improve their role, how establish a more interactive dialogue with states? What do you think about the need for a more important role of the civil society in general within your own institutions?
Well, as you know, the support of civil societies or NGOs is part of our priorities, it's part of our objectives. And so many of the funding that we get, it's to support at the country level, on the ground, the work of the civil societies, the work of women's organization, the work of peasants, whatever the areas are essential. And so we really consider civil society and NGOs like one of our more important stakeholders. So every time I visit any country, we of course have meetings not only with member states, government, parliament, political parties, and civil society as well. And of course, depending on situation, victims, families of victims, etc. We receive lots of, we have lots of relations with civil societies, a lot of networks worldwide or regional-wide and so on. Lots of meetings and audiences and letters from civil society. So we do work a lot. I think this is probably one of the biggest, one of the small entity, but with the biggest work with civil society. And of course, as today in the informals, they were there as well. And I think, the ambassador will say, but from my experience, I would say that the Human Rights Council is probably the one who has the biggest engagement with civil society of the UN. At the global level, of course, at the country level, it's different. Every agency has its own relations. But one of the concerns that we have, and we also have that as a task, is how to protect human rights defenders. But what we have seen, and I cannot recall the numbers right now, but the amount of death of human rights defenders are
really appalling. And you see that particularly there are some areas where there are more intense killings. And that is on land property, human rights defenders of land property, on human rights defenders on environmental issues, human rights defenders on indigenous issues, and gender rights. And of course, LGBTIQ community. Those are the areas where we see the most of the killings. So how to protect? We work at the country level with them. We speak out on behalf of them. We speak with governments. But I think one of the things that is more difficult to convey to government, even though I said it to them, and I always also say it today in the informal session, having been in office, I think the best way to ensure that your policies are the right one, are sustainable, is when you have a constant dialogue and relation with the civil society. Because you might have a fantastic idea in an office of your ministry, but that might not work. I mean, paper supports can have any kind of things. So I believe this concrete relationship with civil society, with people who are organized in different ways, because of group of interest, because of thematic issues, because they live in a neighborhood, in a village, or whatever, to be there, to see their concerns, their needs, to develop policies. So what I always say is the best governance is that when you are grounded on the relation with civil society, because your policies are people-centered. So you have to adapt your policies to the people and not the people to adapt themselves to the policies. And that makes them more legitimate, that makes them more sustainable, and that makes the people can believe that politics can make a difference. Because if they live in a society that is democratic, because they elected representative, but that was all the democracy that is in it, there's nothing else afterwards, that's not enough for people today. That's not enough just to elect somebody. You need to have the space to be able to raise your voice, but not only your voice, also the solutions that you can bring, because people are on the ground, they have experience, they have good ideas, and they can give you very good ideas. So when I talk to governments, even with this hat, I convey all those messages to them. Look, the best thing that you can do is support, and any time governments do attempt, and they do it, to restrict civil space. Some governments are passing laws that anybody who is receiving external funding, it will be considered a traitor to the country or an extremist or whatever. So we raise our voice. We get in touch with the government and said, look, this is unacceptable, it's against the international laws, but we also, when it's needed to speak out, we speak out.
Thank you. According to Michelle Bachelet's Human Rights Council is a champion for NGOs. What among UN institutions, of course, at the global level, as you mentioned. So do you want to develop further the initiative for NGOs? They can, of course, already be involved in some discussions and so on. What is your view about the important role of civil society within the Human Rights Council?
Thank you very much. I think that civil society NGOs are playing an important role in the work of the Human Rights Council. I think that is the only body where you can see civil society NGOs having the same role as members. They can speak during the debate. They have a lot of time to make statements. They can provide room papers. And obviously, this is a very good thing for the protection and promotion of human rights. What is the problem now is that we are facing this situation where you cannot make the difference between real NGOs and the fakes. I mean, what we call GONGO, government-oriented, non-governmental organization. So they are hijacking the work of the council. This is the truth. And we have to find a way to make it more serious so we can get real feedback from real NGOs and giving very relevant information to the council and participating in a relevant way in the work of the council. So and also we have to get a sense of more cooperation between states and NGOs, because the relations are always confrontation, and we do not need confrontation in the council, but as I said, more discussion, more dialogue, more listening to each other, because if they come with real and relevant information, so we can discuss it and try to find out, what are the solutions on the problem in the ground. But during my discussion with the NGOs, sometimes the question of reprisal is raised, and this is, a real threat on the council, on the work of the council. And as president of the Human Rights Council, always where there is, every time where there is cases of reprisal, we promptly call concerned state, telling them, listen, there is a case here in your country, we need more information, you have to do something. And this practice of quiet diplomacy is, has been proved to be very, 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 very good, very efficient. But NGOs, want us to make it public, to say in the room 20 or publish a list saying that X or Y, Z state they are, using reprisals against civil society. But it doesn't work anytime. You do not need to. What is the end, result? What we want is to get result. If we can get it by quiet diplomacy, discussing with state, explaining them that they need to, they don't have to keep passport of human rights defenders. They have to let them travel to Geneva and speak with the world. So we get results. So that's why I am saying that we need to be to bring more cooperation in the UN system, but most importantly in the Human Rights Council, and avoid confrontation, avoid politicizing also question. We have these gongos coming to give us sometimes false information, and the room 20 is, a room where you can see a lot of pressure, a lot of tension, because only some NGOs are politically motivated. So that's why we need to think about it, and if we are serious about what we're doing, we can have a real dialogue and a very calm and productive room 20.
Thank you very much. I propose now to continue with question and answer sessions with the public. I suggest to start to take a first batch of 3-4 questions, and then we will see if we have time for others. Please, in the front here.
Thank you, Madame Bachelet, Ambassador Seck. Thank you very much for your remarks. My name is Bruno Omar from ACT Alliance, a member of the Club Diplomatique de Genève. My question was initially thought regarding the Security Council and the mainstreaming of the human rights, but I will change my question because when I arrived here, I saw a Twitter that was very much related to the topics that you both have mentioned today, in terms of the role of social media in hate speech, dissemination of hate speeches, and when you mentioned in terms of heads of states taking the lead in terms of promoting human rights, and also the shrinking space or civil space. And this Twitter is actually attacking you personally, Ms. Bachelet, and your father in a way that is almost impossible to admit that a head of state can do that. So my question to you is how to deal with these head of states that are member states of the United Nations, that are not only with this kind of attitudes, promoting policies even related to human rights that are promoting hate speech and misogyny or whatever, and also how this could also affect the space for human rights defender in the country, because they is not only against the institution of the UN, but also against the human rights defender. How to deal with this situation that you mentioned that is very normal happening everywhere nowadays? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will take a few other questions, please.
First of all, Ambassador Seck and Commissioner Bachelet, thank you very much for being here with us this evening. Today, it seems unlikely that any political leader is free from controversy, and scandals associated with them have become easily known thanks to the advent of technology that you were speaking about, and it has affected their public image beyond repair, as seen a few weeks ago in the case of Rosselló in Puerto Rico. So my question for you is, what constitutes exemplary, strong leadership considering these circumstances and considering more so that not all of the details are fully known? Thank you.
Thank you very much. One more here. Mr. And...
Yeah, good evening. My name is Noah Patrick from the Permanent Mission of Vanuatu. Thank you, Madam High Commissioner and Ambassador Seck, for your presentation this afternoon. I have two questions that I wanted to ask. One is with respect to this investigative mechanism. You've raised that one of the issues is that you need funding to make sure that this investigative mechanism works. The issue is that whether, for instance, if a country is wanting or, for instance, there is an allegations of human rights happening, and if the country doesn't, let's say, allow the office of the High Commissions to visit, for instance, a place, whether there is a UN mechanism that can deal with that particular situations. Because, for instance, I can take an example of an issue back in the Pacific region that is out of the image of the UN for the last 50 years. And still we have these things happening. And I actually wanted to commend you, Madam High Commissioner, for raising that concerns that you have. And I won't name any states here, but you know what I'm talking about. But that's something that how the UN has to act, because you actually mentioned the issue of Myanmar, that some member states are calling on there is a genocide happening. What is the UN doing? And this is something that has happened in Myanmar. So that's the first question. The second question is with respect to the budget itself, because we can go to the Human Rights Council, adopt all the resolutions, but the issue of implementation of these resolutions is something that is questionable. How the office can request member states to support the implementations of this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe a very last question. Please. Very short question because...
D'accord, merci beaucoup.
Only a question.
D'accord, et je vais la poser en français et l'adresser à Monsieur l'ambassadeur du Sénégal, mon compatriote. Merci pour l'organisation. Monsieur l'ambassadeur, on a entendu votre exposé, mais la question est de savoir, en dehors des défis auxquels l'ONU et l'institution, le Haut Conseil est confronté, les deux en tout cas sont confrontés, la question du financement. How can you deal with the ability of this council if you don't have the means? Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Et la question du financement est évidemment cruciale aussi et au cœur de l'actualité très récente pour ce qui vous concerne chacun de vous. Et nous tous en particulier, mais clairement les difficultés financières en matière de respect des droits de l'homme sont bien connues. I suggest to go ahead with your own answer. I mean, you have the list of the question. Feel free to give your views and respond to each or few of them, please.
Well, to your question, not particularly on the Twitter, I would say democracy is not perfect, but it's the best regime that we have. Because you see sometimes that fortunately you didn't mention anybody, so I can answer you without mentioning anybody as well. Sometimes in some countries, people elect through democratic ways people who are not democratic, who don't believe in human rights, who are racist, who don't believe in gender rights. And the thing is, not that this is hidden. During the campaign, they said all those things, and the people elect them. So democracy is not perfect. So don't ask us to solve that problem, first of all. But having said that, when we recovered democracy in my country, I was nobody. I mean, I was a public officer. Well, first I worked in an NGO, but then, and for my surprise, I was young at that time. Maybe young people cannot believe that I was young once, but I was. And the thing is that I saw that there were elections, and people who were the faces in the government of Pinochet's government were elected senator out of the House of Representatives. So for us, I mean, I've been in prison. My father was killed by torture in prison. We were expelled from the country, etc., etc. And I'm not saying it, I'm saying, and I was alive, so I was much better than other people who were disappeared. And you see, these people were elected by people. They were sitting there in Congress next to people who were fighting against dictatorship. And because I was working at the Minister of Health, I had to go there to present bills or whatever. I had to deal with them. And afterwards, when I thought that defense was something we needed to be involved in because we needed to ensure democracy for the future, we needed the armed forces to understand the democratic values, I went to work to the Ministry of Defense, and every time I went there, not so long after dictatorship, and see the uniforms at the beginning was difficult. So what I mean to say is that you learn that you have to work not only with the people you like or you people you agree with. It's not about making friends. It's about doing what you have to do. So how to deal with them, and I'm not going to go into details, but in many meetings, APEC and others, I had to meet people who clearly have very different not only values, but actions for many countries. And you understand that you need, you have to, if I would say, use your hat. If you're a president as a president, if you're a minister as a minister, and if you cannot deal with that, you have to resign and do something different, and only work with the friends. And one of the things that I always discuss with our colleagues here and with UN Women, and one of the problems may be that when we have meetings with the civil society, it's only with the converted ones, the ones who already believe in human rights, the ones who believe in gender rights. So I said, no, we need to talk to the others, because otherwise we're not winning 1 centimeter. We need people who think differently, to discuss with them, to try to convince them, to find argument. So, having said that, I cannot do miracles. Because there are people who think like that for many years. There are leaders who really don't believe in human rights. Even though maybe if they come here, they will do a marvelous speech. I mean, there are people saying that there were no dictatorships in those countries, that there was no torture when it's clear there was dictatorship and there was torture. And when you think some countries, they want to celebrate the coup d'etat, now, 30, 45, 50 years later. So I would say, don't ask me miracles, but we will do our job. We will be, if we have the settings where we have to meet them, we will tell them everywhere. And when we are asked about those countries, and when we are asked about what to do with those high numbers of human rights defenders who have been killed in the country, we need to say, we need to speak out. Of course, they won't like me, and you could see the Twitter. Clearly, he doesn't like me. But the thing is that I need to do my job. As government, do the job. Because many countries, when we release reports, they hate them. And they call me immediately. And they say, this is not true, this is blah, 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 blah. Even though I have to tell you, because I have suffered allegations that was not true, and I know that NGOs, not all of them are perfect, and some of them have political agenda, I ask my colleagues that every time that we do a report, that we receive allegations from victims, from families, that we verify those allegations. Because otherwise we will lose credibility. So not always you can verify it, unfortunately. And then we speak about allegations. And in other cases, we speak about facts. These are the facts that can be corroborated, verified. And we cannot verify, we say, these are the allegations we received, we cannot verify, but that is what we have received from multiple sources. So I think, but on the other hand, whenever I am and wherever I can, I will speak about the leaders who has to play a role with values that produce collective solidarity, that are not making one people against the other, because that will make our world a terrible world. We already have enough problems. On the scandals, I mean, I think social media is very important to bring issues up, but again, it needs to be responsible. So I would say one of the problems that we have on dealing with the misuse of technology, social media, is how to avoid that the misuse that nobody wants could be used as an excuse to diminish freedom of expression. And that is a very difficult and tricky issue. For example, some people believe that, no, this is freedom of expression and this is not hate speech. So that's where our office had developed guidelines for parliamentarians to identify the difference between freedom of expression and hate speech. And I do believe that freedom, all the freedom, had limits. And those limits has to be very clear. It depends on the situation, of course, but of course people need to be informed. So I'm not talking against information. I'm talking against fake news, against false allegation many times, you know. And of course, societies are different. In some societies, they consider private some things and public some others. Today's world, everything is public. And, but then I would say if we deserve that public knows everything, we need to be responsible. We need to give information that is really serious, because otherwise, I mean, it's not serious, it's not worthy. That kind of freedom is not really what we want. We need freedom so people can make the best decisions, the informed decisions. On the issue of funding and on the representative from Vanuatu, well, today I was asking member states that they're in the meeting that they have to help us. They have to talk to the capitals to discuss our budget. But I have to say very frankly, the issue of the funding is not, I mean, has many different reasons. One is that the UN has not been receiving the cash flow it should. So the whole UN has less money than it should. The third thing is this, we are one of the 3 pillars, wow, but we receive only 3% of the regular budget. So it's a very, not myself, but the budget is a very slim budget. So, so it looks like sometimes that when they decided the budget, the pillar was not maybe so strong voice, but because we have a small budget. But there's also a political reason. Same people who are pushing the pushback against human rights or gender rights, when there are discussions defining budget, there's a lot of tricks. First of all, we say, okay, there's no money, okay. So let us pay this with voluntary contribution from members. No, you cannot, because this is so important, it has to be regular budget. But give me regular budget. Oh, no, we cannot give you regular budget because we don't have the money. But it's a trick, you know, we know that it's a game. And it is political, because it's not that, we know who makes certain decisions. So that's why, but my role is not to neither show with a finger somebody. is, on the contrary, to work and engage all member states so they can really feel that our contribution is an important contribution and they can support as well, or at least not obstaculize our job. And I'm doing that. I'm going to every one of the P5 plus all the members of the General Assembly to discuss, to ask them to support, to explain. We have changed some format because now after the management reform, the budget discussion is different. Before, every 2 years, it was the High Commissioner, and the other year was the Human Rights Council budget. Now it's annual basis, all of it. And so we have changed format, so not only to discuss the figures, but to show what we have done with the money, but with concrete examples, what we did in Africa, in this and this country, in Asia, in Latin America, and so on. So it is a complication because budget, there's not enough money for the multilateralism linked to this pushback on multilateralism. That country haven't paid the contribution, even though they're supposed to be multilateralist. And also happens that sometimes some things happen, and countries get angry about that, and they suspend the money for some time to make a point. So, but anyway, we're not going to give up and continue working on that.
Thank you very much. I would like to maybe focus shortly in a few minutes with you, dear Ambassador, about the implementation of Human Rights Council resolution. This is an important question, and perhaps also the investigating mechanism mentioned before. What is your view about this? Unfortunately, we have only a few minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, the question has been raised by someone from Vanuatu. As I said in my main speech, this link between Human Rights Council and Security Council, some countries refuse to establish, has to be established. We need to realize that if you want to solve human rights issues on the ground, we have to echo what we are doing here in the Human Rights Council somewhere in New York. Because when you look at the agenda of the Security Council, most of the issues on the agenda come from human rights violation in the first place. And the Human Rights Council, its mechanism, the special procedures, are publishing report every month saying, okay, we have to take a look at this situation. This is dangerous. We can have mass atrocity. We can have genocide, but we have our own limit. The Human Rights Council, we can produce a resolution, but we don't have the power of the Security Council. But if there is a clear link between the two bodies, if someone is ready to take up, the fight after we produce a resolution or report by our special procedure mandate holders, I think that we could have better results on the ground in terms of not only protection of human rights, but also implementation of resolutions of the Human Rights Council. But if the same countries who are supposed to watch the peace and security in the world are saying we don't want any link between the Security Council and Human Rights Council, you start having problems. Regarding the budget now, my colleague from Senegal asked the question in French. I will be glad to answer in French. Comme l'a dit Madame la haute commissaire, il a été reporté que la plupart des États membres n'ont pas payé ou ne payent pas régulièrement leurs cotisations. Sur les 193 États membres, seuls 115 ont payé leurs cotisations. Ça déjà constitue un problème de financement pour l'organisation. Mais au-delà de ça, il y a le fait que le troisième pilier, les droits de l'homme, constitue le parent pauvre du système. Ils ne reçoivent qu'une mince partie du budget. Et au-delà de ça, il y a les menaces qui pèsent tout le temps sur les droits de l'homme, de représailles, ne parlez pas de ça, sinon vous allez le ressentir en termes de budget. Et donc tout cela fait que le Conseil est fragilisé. Mais le Conseil des droits de l'homme ne doit pas être fragilisé. C'est le seul organe où certaines questions qui sont les parents pauvres, il y a certaines questions qui ne sont débattues nulle part, qui ne sont débattues qu'au sein du Conseil des droits de l'homme. Au moins, le système peut, à travers le Conseil des droits de l'homme, tirer la sonnette d'alarme sur certaines violations qui se passent dans le monde. Et si nous faisons ce lien entre Conseil des droits de l'homme et Conseil de sécurité, Assemblée générale des Nations unies, si nous renforçons les relations entre New York et Genève, je suis sûr qu'il est possible d'aller de l'avant encore plus dans la protection et la promotion des droits de l'homme. Mais tant qu'on fera fi de ces liens-là, tant qu'on essaiera d'ignorer que New York doit venir en appoint à Genève, qu'il y a un lien direct entre Conseil de sécurité et Conseil des droits de l'homme, nous continuerons à répéter les mêmes doléances, à observer malheureusement les mêmes pratiques sur le terrain, mais nous n'allons pas baisser les bras, nous continuerons à faire notre travail de plaidoyer à travers l'engagement militant, avec la société civile, avec tous les partenaires qui sont soucieux de comment on doit mettre en œuvre la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme et des peuples, qui est une déclaration universelle, comme je l'ai dit. Il n'y a pas un système infaillible de promotion et de protection des droits de l'homme. Tous les systèmes, à mon avis, se valent. L'essentiel, c'est d'aboutir à des résultats sur le terrain.
Thank you very much. Clearly, the UN has the instruments, the institutions to, and human rights is well established within this framework. But as you mentioned before, and this is perhaps the main issue, the main conclusion, we need more about implementation. We need more about action, to move from rhetoric to action, to have concrete results for vulnerable groups, but also ordinary citizens, in order to tackle this growing rhetoric of xenophobic rhetoric and populist one. And states are part of the picture. As you clearly mentioned, dialogue is part of the picture, funding is part of the picture, but of course, I'm used to say that we shall not expect too much from states. And clearly, human rights is a truly common issue. This is our business also, as individual, as such. And clearly, even if the limit of this interstate system is quite obvious in terms of implementation, this is our common responsibility to implement it in our ordinary life and to make sure that human rights can be further implemented more generally. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have to conclude, to finish this conference. Thank you again.
Thank you.